Let's get started. So we're going to continue in the Psalms tonight, and tonight we're going to transition to some of the types of Psalms and just understanding some of the types of Psalms. And so we're going to look at three tonight, hopefully three, maybe two, depending on how much time we have. We're going to look at Psalms of lament, Psalms of trust, and then maybe Psalms of, imprecatory Psalms. Let's start with the lament Psalms. All right, so, so many times as Christians, we feel like there's this pressure to always be cheerful, always be, just happy all the time, and, living in our victorious life, all the time. But the Psalms, specifically the lament Psalms, challenge that notion. They show us that our faith, the strength of our faith isn't in pretending that everything is okay, right? But our strength, the strength of our faith is in our running honestly to God with our pain. All right, so that takes the focus of our faith off of ourselves and our feelings and puts it on God. And so the object of our faith is the rock, the God who never changes. And so the lament Psalms are just raw and honest before God. Actually, you might be surprised to know that the lament Psalms are actually one of the most common genres, so to speak, or the types of Psalms in the book. Nearly 1/3 of all the Psalms are laments to some degree. And, so what does that tell us? It tells us that God made room in His Word for sorrow. He made room in His Word for grief. He made room in His Word for pain, right? So those things aren't, when we experience those feelings, it's not, our emotions come from God. And so it doesn't indicate a lack or an absence of faith. They should drive us back just to a further dependency on God. And so these Psalms aren't included as, these cautionary tales. They're not presented, the lament Psalms aren't presented to us as something to avoid. It's not like, okay, well, woe is me, all these, you're crying out to God, but that's not the way you should do it. Right, it's not a cautionary tale. What it is it's a model of faithful prayer even in times of darkness. It's a model for us to follow when we are in pain, when we are feeling grief or hurt. It shows us how to pray. It shows us who we trust in, and so our faith doesn't hide our pain. In other words, it gives voice to it. And so the lament Psalms give us permission to speak to God about our grief, our anger, our fear, our confusion, and all those things. But instead of just isolating ourselves or just trying to suppress the feelings, instead of just saying, okay, well, I'm feeling this and therefore I shouldn't feel this, and so I'm trying to suppress our feeling, the lament Psalms teach us to engage with God directly. And that tension between faith and pain. Because lament is how our heart talks to God when life does start to fall apart, right? And so in the lament Psalms, we do see a typical pattern. All right, so we're going to see, first of all, I'm going to switch colors here. The address, the complaint, the petition, the expression of trust, and then it's a praise. Yeah. Praise, and the reason I had to look is just, or anticipated praise. And so it begins with an address to God. The psalmist opens by calling upon the Lord, right? Acknowledging his relationship. Oh Lord, or my God. It's some kind of address to God. And then the complaint, an honest expression of whatever the psalmist is feeling, pain, confusion, fear. And so the psalmist will name the circumstance causing the anguish that he's feeling. And then there's the petition, which is the cry for help. Talking to God for intervention. And you'll see this often expressed very urgently, with a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion. And then the expression of trust. Even in the midst of the pain, the psalmist will affirm something true about God's character, his past deeds, or his covenant love. So it's like he's anchoring himself in who God is, because when we worry, what is it really indicating? Yeah, like a lack of trust, right? Now I'm not talking about in terms of lack of saving faith, and trust in God in terms of salvation, but it does indicate a lack of trust. And so the psalmist will try to ground himself in something that, remembering God's faithful love, remembering that God is an unchanging rock. And then there's a praise or anticipated praise. It ends in worship, or at least the promise of worship. Showing a journey from sorrow to hope. Now, not all of the lament psalms end in hope or praise. For example, Psalm 88 is marked in my Bible as a cry for desperation. And he's crying out to God, Lord God of my salvation, I cry out before you day and night. May my prayer reach your presence. Listen to my cry, for I have had enough troubles and my life is near Sheol. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am a man without strength, abandoned among the dead. And I am like the slain laying in the grave, whom you no longer remember and who are cut off from your care. You've lowered me to the lowest parts of the pit. And he goes on and on and on. And then down in verse 18, the very last verse, it says, you have distanced loved one and neighbor from me. Darkness is my only friend. And then it ends. All right, so he follows the kind of the typical pattern, but he doesn't end in praise. Now, what does that tell us? Yeah, so this is part of God's design, to give us a voice even when the resolution hasn't come. Even when if it doesn't end in praise, we can still trust God, right? And he still gives us a voice, or he gives our heart a voice to cry out to him, and a model for us to follow in prayer and turning to him. All right, so let's turn to Psalm 13, and let's just kind of walk through this one. This was the one I've referred to several times in this study so far, but not Psalms 13, but Psalm 13. All right, so he says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long will I store up anxious concerns within me, agony in my mind every day? How long will my enemies dominate me? Consider me and answer, O Lord my God. Restore brightness to my eyes, otherwise I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have triumphed over him, and my foes will rejoice because I'm shaken. But I have trusted in your faithful love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me generously. All right, so walking through that, you see how you see this pattern, right? You see the address. How long, O Lord? O Lord, how long will you forget me? How long will you hide your face from me? And then he moves into his complaint, which is kind of runs together here. But how long will you hide your face from me? How long will I store up anxious concerns within me, agony in my mind every day? How long will my enemy dominate over me? is he trying to sugarcoat anything here? No, right? He's just being really honest with God, and he makes his complaint. And then he makes his petition. Consider me and answer, Lord my God. Restore brightness to my eyes, otherwise I will sleep in death. My enemies will say, I have triumphed over him, and my foes will rejoice because I'm shaken. So he says, consider and answer me. And the expression of trust, he says, but I have trusted in your faithful love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. And then we see the praise. I will sing praise, or I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me generously. All right, so the psalmist isn't afraid to ask honest questions, right? Is this rebellion? No, he's just being honest, right? Because 4 times he emphasizes deep frustration and prolonged suffering. His pain isn't just internal, it's also external. He's got enemies, right? But it's also internal. He's anxious concerns, the agony in my mind. And then it highlights that God's, what he perceives as silence is what hurts the most. All right, but again, this isn't rebellion. It shows his relationship to God. You know, he knows who to cry to. You know, he's even though he's voicing his lament, his complaint, he's making petition to God. He's doing, what's the object of his address? What's the object of his complaint? What's the object of his petition? And what's the object of his expression of trust? It's in the Lord, right? Yeah. And so even his complaint is seen as an act of faith. And so he's pleading with God to see him, to hear him, and to respond. And he uses vivid imagery here. Restore brightness to my eyes. So what does that suggest? He's emotionally, physically, spiritually drained, and he feels like even his very life is at stake. And he's concerned that God's silence is going to give strength to his enemies, that it will embolden his enemies. But notice the petition is specific. David tells God what he longs for, and not just in some kind of like vague, religiously veiled language. He uses heartfelt terms, desperate terms. He said, he says, but I have trusted in your, or consider and answer me, O Lord, my God. And so this teaches us that we can be bold and direct in prayer. That we can make our complaints known to God. We can petition him, and we can be honest. And we can, we don't have to, we can be bold and direct in asking that from him. But then the tone changes in verses 5 and 6, because in the very beginning, you can sense that desperation, right? But then in verses 5 through 6, he says, "But I have trusted in your faithful love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me generously." What changed? Did his circumstances change? No. Right? He's still in distress. So what changed? What? Yeah, his perspective, right? So his heart shifts. David, he's moving from faith to protest. To faith from protest. Right? And he's from fear to faith, and then from protest to praise.
Exactly the opposite of Peter getting out of the boat to walk on the water.
Yeah.
He was looking at Jesus.
He was looking at Jesus, took his eyes off. Right.
And here, David's looking at the waves.
Right.
And then focuses on God.
Right.
So, it's an exact mirror
Right.
of those two events.
Yep. So he trusts in God, in he praises him for his loyalty, his covenant love, and then he anticipates joy and deliverance. But notice this: did the joy and deliverance come in this passage? No, it was anticipated, right? It was an anticipated. He was praising, but it was based on an anticipated joy, and an anticipated deliverance. He wants to sing. But not because his life is perfect, right? Because he knows the character of the God that he is writing about. And so this is the beauty of lament. It begins in sorrow, but it ends in hope. And the very act of crying out to God restores his perspective and renews his trust. So lament, part of the reason that God gives us the Psalms of Lament are to teach us to pray honestly. How many times do our prayers, become, especially in a group setting, but oftentimes even on our own, it becomes kind of formal, and filtered, and kind of emotionally detached. We want to make our prayer sound good. But really and honestly, who are we wanting our prayer to sound good to? Other people, right? We're trying to impress other people by our prayer. I'm going to pray, so especially when you're praying in a group and you're going around, what are you doing? If we're honest with ourselves, most of the time we're thinking, okay, what am I going to say? Or you're going over the prayer in your head, right? But the lament psalms teach us to pour out our hearts to God, without having to feel the need to sanitize it. And we can be honest about our pain, our sorrow. For example, Psalm 62:8 says, pour out your hearts before him, because God is our refuge. The what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. I'll tell you a funny story. Kayla's dating a guy named Eli, and Eli came to church, a couple of weeks ago? He was in town, and we were telling him about, just the church and about some of the different people. And we're telling him about the service and everything, and I said, now, you haven't heard somebody pray until you've heard Don Harper pray. And I was like, you're going to know, if Don prays in the service, you're going to know exactly who Don Harper is. And that's always, we told him a little bit about it. And sure enough, that Sunday that he came, Don Harper was the one who prayed for the offertory prayer. And after the service was over, I said, all right, who's Don Harper? And he said, the guy who prayed during the offertory prayer. I said, yep, you got it. Yeah.
He's so humble and simple, with his prayers, yet they're profound in the
Right.
sense of, it's amazing hearing a child.
Right, especially for his age, to have the maturity, and the honesty, just that, yeah.
The first time I ever heard
Yeah.
him pray, it brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
This is a good one right here.
Brother John,
Yeah.
is it a sin when you have these kind of feelings not to pray in this fashion?
That's a good question.
Is that hypocrisy?
I don't think so. Did you have an idea about that?
God knows
Right.
your heart, and if you hold back, that's really dishonoring.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, I'm going to fool God, or I'm going to hide.
Right.
So, I think the reason there's so many lament songs is because they're necessary.
Yeah.
They're not optional.
Right. Yeah, but I guess my question. So would you say that it is a sin, or to not pray and toward? Yeah, right. That's what. So I to clarify what I said. I don't think it is a sin to not. And this is just thinking off the top of my head. Now it could become a point where it becomes sinful to withhold, right? Because we're saying, okay, here's what I'm going through. I know what to do about it, and I'm not doing it. But at the same time, I don't know that I wouldn't say that, and I don't think you're saying this either, but I wouldn't say that it's a sin in the moment immediately to not have that kind of mentality. Because I think this is something that God molds us into. Because it's progress, not perfection, is the goal. Sure. Right. There could be a point, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have another you know, a perspective on it. But I think, yeah, there could be a point where it becomes like if you're going through it and you're like digging your heels in and saying, I'm not going to pray to God about this. I'm not going to cry out to Him. I'm not going to be honest with Him about this. That could cross that line. But
Say lament psalms could very easily slip over into sin.
right.
Because you're complaining,
About the consequences of your sin.
you never get to the place where you express trust and pray.
Right.
You just,
Right. You're just lamenting all the time. Right.
And you're almost accusing God.
Right.
You forgot.
Right.
You forgot.
Right.
You forgot. And you never
Right.
come to the realization, I'm lying
Right.
because God has
Right. And yeah, I think there certainly it could get to that point. But you know, like between here and here, what's the expected time frame? 5 minutes, same prayer, 10 minutes, 30 minutes a day, a week, a year. You know, between here and here, what's the expected time frame? You know, again, 5, 10 minutes, same prayer, year. I think I don't want to say everything is based on circumstances, but it's circumstantial. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. Right. But at the same time, if you never get from here to here, then there's a problem. Right. Because there is an expectation of getting to a point of expression of trust and praise. Now, but the Psalm 88 never gets to praise. But I think it's assumed. But yeah, I mean that's a good question. That's a good point. Because yeah, I mean we do want to, you know, that's part of why He gives us the Psalms of Lament. That's why I say it's a model for us to follow, for us to go through. Okay, so lament. Oh, did somebody say something? Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Well.
David wrote and stuff, and his laments towards God, like it was like where he was confessing his sins to God.
Yeah.
And he was pouring out his heart for God and saying, like, what do I do? Like he was practically giving up fully on himself, and his heart and his posture were in those verses toward God fully.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as in like need of help.
And going back to just the personal versus corporate kind of thing. My only question, and just to take it a step further, would be, should it be practiced more in a corporate environment? You know, now, I mean, obviously, in a worship service, maybe not. You know, we're not going to be crying out to God and voicing our complaints and our petitions and laments and all that stuff. But at the same time, but it's like in a prayer meeting type setting, or you know, tonight. I mean, why not? Right. Well, yeah, Sunday school, for example. Yes, in a small group setting, why not? You know, maybe we need to be a little bit more vulnerable and open.
It allows us to pray for each other and bear
Yeah.
burdens. And I would say that those are sometimes like, I would say, the more necessary. I'm not like downplaying like the time like where you're behind the pulpit, but like sometimes those moments are the most fruitful moments, I would say, for a lot of men to like let their guard down and be able to
Yeah.
accept, I would say, accepting the need of the church and stuff, and like the need of actually being a part of the church.
Yeah.
And lay down the guards and stuff that they sometimes have up.
I mean,
Brother Don gives country version.
yeah, right. He does. That's what I'm saying. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, he'll say, Lord, it's been hot, my crops are
Yeah.
burning up, I'm complaining.
Right. But he's like,
Give us a little bit of rain.
right.
But Lord,
But not too much rain.
I know it's gonna be the right thing.
Right. And then he ends in an expression of trust and praise. Right. Yeah. I mean, Don walks through this model a lot on Sunday mornings. That's true. Now, you know, my question would be, maybe we should do that more of that. You know, especially, like I said, in the right setting. I think sometimes we have kind of sterilized church to a certain extent. Because if part of church, what's part of the reason for church? Well, fellowship, but building each other up, encouraging one another. And part of that, yeah, right, sharpening one another. And part of that is teaching each other to go through, things like, because you come, and we're kind of going off on a tangent here, but when people come to church and you say, hey, how's it going? What's the typical response? Everything's good. Although in a church of, let's just say 100, if everybody were to come, everybody out here is good every Sunday morning? No. You never get to the end of it, right? Yeah, exactly. So, maybe we should do more of this. Anyway, that's so lament teaches us to pray honestly, all right? But also lament helps us to draw near even when we feel fear or far. Didn't mean for that to rhyme. Because when life hurts, a lot of times we feel like withdrawing from God. And I see this all the time as a pastor. And Brother Jim, you've probably seen this as well. When somebody is going through some kind of immense pain or fear or loss, so many times they feel like they want to isolate themselves. They feel like they say, well, I need to just be on my own for a little bit. I'm going to stay away from church for a little bit. And my response to that is typically to lovingly and pastorally tell them that's the time you need the church the most, right? When we feel like withdrawing from the church or from God, we need to draw near to Him and draw near to the church. So lament draws us closer. It teaches us to draw closer to God. Even the complaint, how long, O Lord? It assumes that there's a relationship there, right? So in his address to God, oh Lord, how long, O Lord? He has the relationship with the Lord to be able to cry out to Him. And so lament tells us that, or it says, I still believe that you're listening even if I don't feel like you're listening. How long will you forget me forever? Does he really feel like God's forgotten him? Maybe. It feels like it. But I don't think that's what he's trying to say. I don't think he's saying that God has forgotten me. He's saying I feel like God's forgotten me. Has God hidden His face from him? Well, we know not, but I feel like he probably feels like it. How long will I store up anxious concerns within me and agony in my mind every day? When we don't feel like God is near, lament teaches us that He's still listening, even when we don't feel like it. And then it also models hope in the midst of our grief. It shows us that we don't have to wait for healing in order to worship. Again, going back to somebody who's experiencing loss, especially if, in the loss of a loved one or a child or a husband or wife, we don't have to wait for healing in order to worship. So many times people say, well, when I get over this, when I get past the grief, when I get past the pain, then I'll come and worship. But we can worship while we wait. All right? In fact, worshiping even in the midst of all those things going on is a powerful testimony to our faith and the object of our faith. And so in times of distress, instead of going to social media or some kind of distraction or isolating ourselves, let God's Word help you and give language to your struggle. Let the Psalms, or really, any of it, but especially the Psalms, lead you into hope. Because God, He's a God of hope. He wants us to place our faith and our trust in Him. Lament is not faithlessness. It's faith expressed through grief. All right? So it's faith expressed in the midst of the grief. And so the lament psalms, they're a model for our spiritual discipline. It helps us to name our sorrow and rather than just trying to numb it, like trying to just kind of isolate or suppress it or numb it. It names it, and it gives us a voice. All right, so now we'll look at Psalms of trust. All right, so the lament psalms give a voice to our pain. Trust psalms help us find, see God as our place of refuge, as a rock that we can trust in. It's that solid ground beneath our feet. And so these psalms are often written in the middle of trouble as well. All right, so they're not these psalms of trust that when everything is good. They're written oftentimes in the middle of trouble, but they still express confidence in God's sovereignty, His care, and His nearness. And so they speak from the perspective of somebody who has been there, who's learned, who's gone through the pain, who has a history with the Lord and maturity in the Lord and experience that God is faithful. And so they don't deny danger, they don't deny hardship, but they declare that God is greater than danger and God is greater than hardship. And so there's a structure to the trust psalms as well. First, we often see a statement of confidence, and then a description of the trouble. And a resolution. To the trust. Or to the, and then an invitation to others. All right, so let's just walk through these real quick just to clarify more what they mean. So statement of confidence is just an affirmation of God's character or some kind of affirmation of God's help. Description of the trouble or uncertainty is it's a realistic, but it's not, or it's mentioned, but it's not dwelled upon. All right? And then the resolution to trust is just a statement of peace or stability or fearlessness because of God, because of who He is. But then also there's often an invitation to others, joining in trust in God. All right, so be still and know that He is God. Or a call for somebody to place their hope and trust in God as well. Here's who God is, and here's what He's done for me, and here's what He can do for you. That there's that invitation for others to follow. All right, so for example, Psalm 23. All right, we've gone through this before on Sunday mornings, but familiar psalm, trusting in God's presence. Often this is used as a funeral psalm, which is appropriate, right? But this is a psalm for all of us every day. It's not just for when we die. It's not just for when we reach the end of life. And this is a psalm for all of life. But okay, so let's walk through it. Verses 1 through 3 of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I go through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for as long as I live. All right, so again, we see, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. There's a statement of confidence. But He says, and He says, He leads me, he lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. But then there's a description of trouble. Even when I go through the valley of the dark, even when I go through the valley of the, I'm trying to read in the CSB. I've got it memorized in ESV, right? So, even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And then there's a trust in the Lord's goodness. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. All right, so, but notice, some of the things, the statement of confidence. The Lord is my shepherd. It's very personal. That's a personal statement. He's not just a shepherd. What is he? The Lord is my shepherd, right? I shall not want. And so David is drawing on his own experience, the experience of actually tending sheep, and he's applying it to the loving care of God. And he uses it to describe God's care for us. So he says, I have what I need. Trust doesn't demand luxury. Trust in God doesn't demand that we have everything that our heart desires. Right? We have everything we need. And so we see in the Lord's provision, we see sufficiency. He has given us what we need. Right? He's our shepherd. He knows what we need. He's given us what we need. He leads us beside green pastures and quiet waters. So he gives us physical rest, but also he gives us spiritual rest and refreshment. He renews my life. He revives what's weary. He restores our soul. So our trust isn't rooted in our circumstances, right? Our trust is rooted in God's character. Because even when life is just chaotic, even when life feels like it's out of control, God is our shepherd, and this shepherd's guidance brings rest to our souls. And so even when we go through the darkest valley, we don't have to fear. He acknowledges the dark valley, right? He acknowledges the valley of the shadow of death, which shows us that trust doesn't require the absence of danger. We don't have to, in order for us to trust God, doesn't mean that we have to live a life that's free of danger. And the presence of danger doesn't indicate a lack of trust. But he said, even in the dark valley, I will fear no evil. I will fear no danger. Why? Because you're with me, right? Because you are with me. Because you, Lord, are with me. God's presence is the answer to his fear. God doesn't just send help. He comes himself. And I love that, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So he's not just, overseeing us walking through the dark valley. He's with us in the dark valley. His rod and his staff are comforting us and protecting us in the dark valley. And just the fact that he has a rod and staff, those are tools for protection and for guidance. So even in the valley, the shepherd is actively leading and defending. And then it ends with trust in the Lord's goodness. Verses 5 and 6. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. All right, so he prepares a table